As usual, another great guest, but a quick diversion. You'll notice that our full name is the Marketplace for Health, Wealth, and Freedom. Well, let's talk about your health for a moment. If you'd like to escape from the stranglehold of insurance and be able to see alternative doctors or go across state lines for care, then you definitely need to take a look at patientempowerment.mpb.health and see if that's the fix you've been looking for. Now, let's get back to the show.
Welcome, everyone, to another weekly webinar with Freedom Hub. I'm Charlie Fromm, and I'm joined by Jim Krapek, my co-host. Jeff Cantor is on the mend, our other co-host from years on, and maybe he'll surprise us occasionally, at least when Jim and I are out for whatever reason. And today's guest, Mark Skousen, is important because, as happens with so many of our guests, the times make it really relevant. And a lot of people are really scared and nervous about the return of 1970 stagflation, if that's what's happening. And Mark is one of the top living economists in the world, and he'll correct the record for what's going on when he starts his little pitch. But if I can share my screen really quickly, let me kind of give you my story with him. And I guess in the mid-2000s, around his nascent conference that has become the go-to convention for how I describe it, entrepreneurs who are idealists and idealists who are entrepreneurial. Let me say that 3 times, in Vegas. And I've gone a few times, exhibited, helped organize panels. And in the mid-2000s, I was helping Michael Strong create Flow, which is conscious capitalism now. And that was kind of financed by John Mackey at Whole Foods. And through that effort, I don't remember why, but I got connected to Mark around his Freedom Fest, which is kind of starting, I guess, around the mid-2000s. And for some reason, I was teaching Kundalini Yoga, and one of our top guys knew Mark, grew up with him, Guru Charan Singh Khalsa, who was named something else back then. And, Mark and he were happy to reunite, and Guru Charan came out to Vegas and did a religious comparative panel. Maybe he taught some yoga in the morning. I know they still do that really early. So it's a pretty eclectic conference. I love it. Captain Kirk has spoken there, big wigs. It's fun. People know about it. The second connection I have with Mark is when I was the Cato Institute Government Affairs Associate Director, I discovered early on in the early 2000s that there was an internecine war going on between, Rothbardian libertarians and Austrian economists and Chicago school economists and the Milton Friedman class. And, I always kind of laughed about it, but it's a serious divide. And this book, I guess, was Mark's effort to bring the two together while also acknowledging the differences, Vienna and Chicago. I have that book in my bookshelf, and you guys maybe want to get it too. The next book that I think is really relevant for today is The New Scrooge in Investing. I don't know if it's totally relevant, but in my mind, people get scared with stagflation. They're going to do what? They're going to pinch pennies. They're going to retrench and get scared. And so maybe Mark will pull some gems from this book on how to advise folks to be more careful, while also not losing on opportunities. And people who do invest know that he has a famous investment newsletter. And then he has a book which I can't locate right now, but it's a completed autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. And I mentioned that because if you know that famous Franklin quote, apparently a passerby asked him outside the 1787 convention, what kind of government had you founders given us? And Franklin's famous reply was, a republic if you can keep it. Now, as the author of the completed autobiography, Mark can correct that quote. So many quotes are incorrect, but the point of that quote is obvious. a republic is hard to keep. Look at YouTube's on Roman history. Republics are easy to collapse and morph into dictatorships and empires like we might have now. And a lot of people are scared about all the schemes from cronies. Are they taking away our republic? Are we losing American values and freedom? So it's not just about the economy, it's about politics. So Mark, that's my intro for you. You want to tell us about the stagflation, Freedom Fest, your books, whatever's on your mind, we'll go to Q&A.
Thank you, Charles. It's a pleasure to be with this group for the first time that you've organized, and I guess you meet on a weekly basis. I've had a pretty eclectic background, growing up in Portland, Oregon, and which I found is a real intellectual community, and then having traveled the world. I've been to 77 countries. I've lived in 6 countries. Lived in Venezuela for a whole year. So I have a particular interest in the road to serfdom that Venezuela is going through. And this is always a reminder to us, as Ronald Reagan said, that we're one generation away from losing our freedom. Venezuela lost their freedom in 10 years. It didn't take long. And here's a country that's the most, the richest country in South America, has more oil reserves than Saudi Arabia. And it shows the sinister nature of ideologues, socialists and communists and Marxists that have the Gramsci model. I don't know if you're familiar with Antonio Gramsci, but he made the argument that you didn't need to engage in war and violence to take over a country. You could do so by taking over the culture, the institutions, the media, the universities. And we've definitely seen that. And they do a much better job than we do. I think in the last recent elections, we have seen how the Democrats are much better organized than the Republicans in terms of taking over government. So you can call it fraud, voter fraud, or whatever you want to do. I just think they had a better strategy than we did. And the Republicans did. I'm more of an independent myself rather than any of the major political parties. But in terms of just looking at the economy, what you have are 2 tremendous forces. You have 3 tremendous forces at work, and 2 are positive, or 1 is positive and 2 are negative. The positive is the tremendous technological advances that we have seen in the last 20 or 30 years. Truly remarkable. This is just one example of it. Here we are on Zoom, which really was created to help us to get through this lockdown. I don't call it the pandemic, I call it the lockdown, because I think that's really what caused all the problems. I believe the COVID-19 was simply a bad case of the flu, if you will, but it killed less than 0.3% of the world population. And so I don't think it really qualifies as a pandemic. But look at, one thing that we did learn from this was the incredible power of government. I've written one of the books I've written, which you may not be familiar with, is called The Maxims of Wall Street. And in it, there's a great quote from Sir Harry Schultz, who said, never underestimate the size of a panic or the power of a politician. And the incredible ability with these executive powers to shut down the economy and take away our rights. And look what's happened in Canada and Australia and now China. These are, we've learned that there is no limit to government policy, it seems. The Constitution didn't really protect us that much. Although I will say that one thing the Constitution did help is the common market that exists. So while they shut down the borders between Canada and the United States and Mexico and the United States and travel and so forth, you could still travel and you could still move around within the United States. So they weren't able to remove all of those authorities. But the other two factors, which are both negatives in my opinion, although on a short-term basis, a lot of people would argue they're positive, is how aggressive fiscal and monetary policy has been, where you've seen a huge government spending going through the roof, and Trump was part of that. He never reduced the national debt. The national debt went up under him, and they've gone up even more under Biden. Government spending, just throwing money right and left at various things. And then the Federal Reserve accommodating them. The money supply has increased 45% in the last year. So this explains inflation. It's not the war between Russia and Ukraine that's exacerbated the situation, making inflation worse. But it was really a combination of the lockdown, of the printing of money, the giving away of a lot of money. This is the cause of the inflation. As an Austrian economist, we all know that there's no free lunch, and that we're all paying the price through inflation and a boom bust cycle. So what we're seeing is a rather dramatic boom phase that we're seeing in real estate and the stock market. All of these investments could drop 50%. Stock market could drop 50%, and real estate could come back down 50%, and we'd be at a more reasonable level. So I'm not predicting when something like this would happen, but I think at some point it's really quite possible. On the positive side, business is really in pretty good shape. If you look at the major corporations, they all have heavy cash positions. So they learned from the 2008 financial crisis, do not be short on cash, because you're going to need it to protect yourself on the downside. So a lot of people have overlooked the fact that corporations have cut their costs, have a very heavy cash position, so they're in a much better shape than they ever have been. The biggest fear is the threatening rise in taxes, regulations, another pandemic occurring, another war developing. This is the kind of thing that we are worried about. Charles mentioned our Freedom Fest conference. My idea behind Freedom Fest is simply this. The longer I've lived, the more I've realized that, getting back to my earlier comment, we're not doing a very good job of protecting our freedoms. The stock market is near an all-time high, certainly, but that's artificial to some extent. And so we have chosen as our theme, turning the tide, because actually there is one chart I should put up there, and that is, I've shown it a number of times in my newsletter and other services, and that is government spending as a percent of GDP has no end in sight. If you look at the chart, all the major countries are seeing a record level of government spending as a percent of GDP. So how do we reverse that tide? Well, I think that's our subject at Freedom Fest, and we're more solution oriented. And I think that's really important. You know, too often you go to conferences and all they talk about is how terrible things are, and the world's coming to a hell in a handbasket, and there's nothing we can do about it. And there's lots of evidence for that. But we have to look at so many examples. There are examples where the tide has been reversed. You saw Reaganomics, some elements of Ronald Reagan making a difference in terms of the interest rates and inflation, fighting and bringing down interest rates and inflation, bringing down tax rates. So there are potential problems we're seeing. So we're looking at all elements of where the tide can turn. You're seeing it, the backlash against the aggressive community, the transgender, homosexuals, whatever you want to call it. It's interesting to see how that's backfiring. And my attitude is, as a libertarian, is live and let live. But unfortunately, the homosexual community or transgender, lesbian, LQ, whatever you want to call it, they're not just satisfied with live and let live. They want to aggressively impose their views on others. And it's not libertarian at all. It's aggressive. It's authoritarian. They want to, they're engaged in missionary work to convert their way of life and forcing it on others by indoctrination in the schools. And so I think that's going to be a really interesting discussion and debate, how you're seeing a reversal in that approach with the Florida parental rights law and other states doing that as well. So that's just one example. Another one, we have the Anthem Film Festival, and we have a film by David Teese called Grid Down, and it talks about the threat. We talk about what are the threats from abroad, the foreign threats, and of course they include things like nuclear war, but one that is not taken into account as much is the threat of attacks on the power grid, the electric grid. That is, we've got this interconnected system, electrical power system that could be brought down through terrorist attacks. And this talk, or this movie that David Teese has put together, is going to be really interesting, where he talks about the EMP, or electric magnetic pulse problem. So you can have a nuclear explosion in the sky, and it can knock out our entire electrical system. And we know we're going to live a barbaric lifestyle. I mean, that's a much smarter thing to do rather than a nuclear blowing up cities and stuff like that. And so what I like about this film is they're talking about real solutions to this problem, and how individual utilities are actually solving this problem on their own. So I like that kind of view. We also have John Cleese coming, the famous British actor and producer. He's our keynote speaker, and he's talking about the pushback against the cancel culture. And again, this is another example of turning of the tide. So we're trying to develop a optimistic perspective. Our goal at Freedom Fest is to bring together the freedom movement. We all live busy lives. We've got things going on, various jobs, and we have our own organizations that support us and our freedom groups and stuff. And the idea behind Freedom Fest is to bring them all together once a year for 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4 days, to learn and to network and to socialize and celebrate liberty. And it really is invigorating, as Charles and others will tell you. It's just great to get together like this. And there's a buzz there in the exhibit hall that you cannot sense at any other conference. I mean, it's truly remarkable. And so we bring together authors, professors, economists, geopolitical experts, healthcare living experts, music, dance, philosophy, history, science and technology. It's a Renaissance gathering in so many ways. So there's something for everybody at this conference. We do have debates. We have our mock trial. Legalization of drugs is our, we're putting legalization, drug legalization on trial. We've we have a pretty good lineup for that. We have Ben Stein debating Art Laffer on the Laffer curve, and should the tax rich be taxed more? We have a religion debate between Michael Shermer and Eric Metaxas, who has written a book called Is Atheism Dead? About some new discoveries in archaeology and arguments that are pushing back against the movement toward atheism. So there's things at Freedom Fest that you just don't see at any other conference. And we have our film festival that my wife Joanne does, which has been very popular. Many of these films have won awards after winning at the Anthem Film Festival. We're also doing, for the very first time, the Libertarian Comedy Fest. We need a little humor this year, and John Cleese is leading that with his history as a comic. And we have our investment conference, our 3-day global financial conference, which is something that's unusual. So you're not going to go to Freedom Fest just to hear politics. It's a lot more than that. It covers the entire perspective of what people's interests are. So dates are July 13th through the 16th. We already have over 1,100 people signed up for our conference, and that's not counting the speakers or the exhibitors. And we'll have 2,000 to 3,000 people showing up there. So if you haven't been to Freedom Fest, you really need to put it on your calendar and push aside any other events that you've had. We've had people who have canceled family reunions or made the Freedom Fest their family reunion. So lots of possibilities there. And the other thing is, last year we moved to South Dakota because of the lockdown. Normally we have Freedom Fest in Las Vegas. They have the cheapest rooms. They're the best convention center in the world, and easy to get there and so on. But because of the lockdown, we moved to Rapid City, South Dakota. We took up every hotel room. I mean, it was unbelievable. We had nearly 3,000 people there. And a lot of people had not been to Mount Rushmore, and it was just a beautiful sight. So since that positive experience, we're doing every other year in Las Vegas. And then the next year, we will choose a city somewhere around the world, around the United States to go to. So next year, we'll be going to Memphis, Tennessee, and they are so excited about having us there. They're really laying out the red carpet. But in terms of our conference this year in Las Vegas, we have Kennedy from Fox Business, who will be our MC for all 4 days. We're just negotiating with Fox Nation. Fox News will be live streaming Freedom Fest. So for those of you who can't come, but it will only be the general sessions, and we have 10 to 12 breakout sessions every hour. So there's a lot more to it than just the live streaming of the main sessions. So those are just some of the things that are going on with the Freedom Fest conference and the economy, and be glad to open it up to discussion at this point on any of the things that I've touched upon.
Well, thanks, Mark, and folks in chat. I suggested clicking the reactions tab around your Zoom controls, where you'll find the raise hand icon. So please raise your hands. I'll just ask questions until someone raises their hand. Start off with, I just came back from Disney with my kids, despite the wonderful political pressure on them to, refocus on family values, which was, I think, Walt Disney's purpose a century ago, rather than the indoctrination you mentioned. But on the way back, I stopped at Jekyll Island. And I got a coffee mug, and I convinced my family to stay there overnight on the way back to Georgia Island. And I brought my coffee mug, Mark, to go back to your book, Vienna in Chicago. When I was helping Governor Johnson run for president, he disappointed a lot of my Ron Paul friends by not prioritizing that wonderful End the Fed movement Ron Paul had started in the '08 campaign, which really focused people on what a lot of us feel is the source of a lot of our pain, the spigot of money that allows the elitist and special interests to game government for their benefit. Where are you on that? I mean, Gary Johnson has said, well, if you end the Fed, well, the Treasury Department can print just as much money, which was an interesting argument, but a lot of folks didn't buy it. And they want that refocus on the Fed, a la Thomas Jefferson against Alexander Hamilton or Andrew Jackson. Let's rout out that den of vipers. How important is it to end the Fed?
So first of all, the Fed is a better choice than having the Treasury in charge. I think there's something to be said for an independent Federal Reserve that will not just kowtow to the desires of the Treasury, which would be to print money directly. So the Federal Reserve never prints money directly. It's indirect through open market operations. And so they expand the money supply by increasing bank balances in all the major banks, starting in New York, where the open market operations take place. So they can and have often been independent. You cannot believe the pressure that was put upon Paul Volcker, who was really the best Fed chairman. And he was not particularly a gold bug. He was actually anti-gold. He supported going off the gold standard. But I went through that period in the 1970s, and it was really interesting how so many of the gold bugs had predicted hyperinflation and runaway inflation, Hans Sennholz being a classic example, who said, well, there's no discipline now. Once we go off the gold standard, there's no discipline. Well, there still is discipline. It's not as good as the gold standard. The discipline is the stock and bond markets. They don't like inflation. You can see, since inflation has become a problem, how the stock and bond markets have struggled. So there is discipline. It's just not as strong as the gold standard. So I'm kind of in Steve Forbes' camp in terms of relying on some form of a gold standard, where not that we're going to go back completely to the gold standard. That's not going to happen, for the simple reason that you'd have to set a price of $50,000 per ounce of gold to go back on the gold standard and have gold backing of all the banknotes and bank accounts and so forth. And that's a huge redistribution problem from those who don't own gold, which is the majority of Americans, to a small number who do. So it's not going to happen. So what is the alternative? Well, the alternative is to adopt some kind of a rule. I'm in the Milton Friedman camp on this, that we establish some kind of a rule, whether it's tied to the gold price or it's long-term gold price, determining how much money supply increases, or it's a steady computer-generated M2, a broad-based money supply figure M3, increasing at a steady rate. It's hard because in today's world, it's difficult to determine what is the money supply, especially when you have digital money like Bitcoin being used for some transactions, not a lot. Look, the Federal Reserve, no country is going to eliminate a central bank, because the first thing that there's too much power to give up to control it. So the best thing is to put restrictions on the Federal Reserve on how much money they can increase and to avoid the problem. So mine is a little bit of a mixed message. It's not as hardcore, if you will, that one would hope for the gold bugs. But I'm trying to give a practical solution to the problem.
Fair enough. Libertarians are divided. Kevin Rollins or Murray Sabrin, I think you have a chat follow up on that.
Charles, that's me.
That's you, Murray Sabrin.
Mark, I appreciate everything you said. It seems to echo a lot of the things I have in my Navigating the Boom Bust Cycle book, which came out last year, where I go over the different theories of the boom bust cycle. And of course, I come down on the Austrian side of explaining the boom bust cycle. The regulation, I think that would be good from to have a central bank without gold would be, and here's where I differ with your explanation or analysis. Mises pointed out there are two types of inflation: simple inflation, where you just print money, and then credit inflation, which the Fed engages by open market operations, which manipulates interest rates. So as Ron Paul and Rothbard and others have said, let's have the Fed not manipulate short-term interest rates and let them get out of the business of price controls regarding short-term interest rates. That, I think, would be a huge, huge reform of the Federal Reserve, because there's no reason that we should have a central bank determining one of the most important prices in the economy, the interest rate on short-term securities. So that would be my first observation of how to, quote, reform the Fed. And I think people in our camp would agree with that. And then, of course, the other issue becomes, in a fiat money world, what should be the money supply? What should the money supply be? Well, one of the first books I read about this, or monographs, was Rothbard's What Has the Government Done to Our Money in 1974. And he points out conclusively, I think, that the money supply should be left to the market, not to the central bankers. And that if we take that approach, then we put the Fed on the defensive as to why the money supply should grow. And Rothbard goes into all the reasons given by the proponents of fiat money why the money supply should grow. And we know from both theory and practice that if the money supply were kept constant, then we would have the glorious time of what? Gentle deflation, which is the benefit of lowering prices for everyone in the economy. And I think we have to make that point very crystal clear, that there's good deflation and there's bad deflation. The bad deflation of 29.33 and the good deflation that we saw in the post-Civil War period, where prices were continuously going down because of the tremendous productivity in the economy. So that's my 2 cents about how we address the Fed issue, that if we're going to keep the Fed, let it do what it does best, clear checks. That's what they should be doing. Rather than trying to macro manage the economy from the Eccles building.
So you made 2 points here, and let me respond to each one. First, on interest rates, the reason the Fed has switched from monetary aggregates to interest rate policy is simply because of the revolution in money and the deregulation of the financial institutions, so that M1 became irrelevant.
Right.
M2 started becoming irrelevant. You had these broader based money supply. So they kind of gave up on what is the money supply. So I'm sure you're aware of that situation. Sure. So then they switched to the interest rates. Now, I tend to agree with you, and so did Milton Friedman on this, that the Fed should just get out of the business of the discount rate and setting rates and so forth. There is an argument for smoothing out the day-to-day transactions that you get in the Fed funds rate. I'm sure you're aware of how that works. But in general, I tend to agree with you that the Fed should just get rid of the interest rate factor. Now, that brings us up to the second factor, and that is the money supply. Now, I think if you had a system where the money supply stayed exactly the same year after year, I think that would create some difficulties in the marketplace. I mean, even under a gold standard, the money supply increased 1 to 2% per year,
Sure.
And sometimes as much as 5% when you had gold rushes in California, in Alaska, in South Africa, and so forth. But generally, if you look at the monetary base based on the gold standard, it moved up pretty smoothly, pretty steadily. And you did have an increase, and it didn't increase faster than economic growth. Economic growth was still 3 to 4% a year, and monetary gold expanded 1 to 2%. So that would create this gentle deflation that you're talking about. The other issue is, Rothbard wanted to eliminate eliminate the delinkage between the dollar and gold. He wanted 100% gold dollar. Just from a practical point of view, I don't think you can go to that. I just don't think from a practical point of view that you can go back to 100% gold dollar. In order to do it, gold would have to be 50,000 a year. So this would create a massive redistribution of wealth, and it would create a chaos, and you would have a lot of angry people. Majority of people would be against this because it's a windfall to the gold bugs. So it's just not going to happen, Murray, in that respect. So the best thing you can do, and frankly, I know a lot of people favor the denationalization of money, and you have all these different currencies, just like the digital currencies, where you have 3,000 of them out there. There's not a winner-take-all market here, although Bitcoin is dominating, but you never know if that will be the choice of digital currencies. The biggest problem with multiple currencies is, of course, that you have a hard time now determining what prices are. The bid-ask spread is a serious problem. The exchange, cost of exchange. I mean, we've all been in the early days when we went to Europe and we had to deal with 12 different currencies. It was madness and it was very difficult. But when you adopted the euro, and the euro was basically, as Huerto de Soto has pointed out, is basically a kind of a gold standard. The euro was pretty hard currency. I don't know if it still is, but it certainly was for the first 10 or 20 years. And the convenience of having one currency is extremely powerful. It's one reason the United States has been so exceptional, that you have this huge common market where you had one currency, the dollar, and you had free trade between all the states. And Europe was trying to imitate that. And unfortunately, they had cultural differences that made it more difficult to achieve that level. But you can see the basic argument there for one currency, for one big, large free trade zone. That seems to be the best thing. So look, there's no perfect ideal monetary system that we can go to. It's just not possible. So you don't want to let the perfect get in the way of the good, as Voltaire said.
Okay, Rob, you want to unmute yourself?
Certainly. Thanks, Charles. So I'm going to steer away from monetary policy, if folks don't mind, as thrilling as it is. And I just thank you, Mark, for joining us today. And thank you, Charles, for these wonderful talks. I've been connected on Facebook with Charles and Mark and Murray and Bruce and some other people on this call for years. So this is really a kind of neat to have sort of an intimate call of a dozen or so people. And with respect to Freedom Fest, I've never been, but as I mentioned in the chat, I'm registered to go. I'm really excited. I wanted to go last year and many other years, and it just wasn't in the cards. There are a couple of things, and maybe I'll just ask one of them or be brief with it, to ask you, Mark, in terms of issues regarding freedom and turning the tide. And the last 2.5 years with COVID and other events have certainly been very interesting. And one thing that kind of is, to me, and I think a lot of other folks, a common thread, whether it's COVID and the lockdowns, whether it's the George Floyd video and the protests and riots that came from that, whether it's the 2020 presidential election and the January 6th incident, and even the Ukraine, what to me is sort of the common thread is a term that I did not really understand, and I have researched a lot in the last couple of years, and that is propaganda and censorship. Because, you know, I generally agree with you that COVID is basically flu. And I was asking myself a couple of years ago, how are people falling for this? And people have increasingly looked to the media as a totally unreliable source of information. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts on sort of what propaganda is and censorship, and what have you seen, particularly in the last 2.5 years, around all of these events, and is it a subject of interest, you know, for you, particularly in pursuit of freedom and sort of as we're all sort of guarding against these intrusions, you know, by the state and whatnot?
So I do think that the cancel culture is very much a part of this, as part of the effort to suppress alternative views. All science is political science now. You cannot trust any study. There's confirmation bias in all these studies. So we are in limbo, if you will, in terms of what is the truth. And so we take the Ben Franklin philosophy at Freedom Fest. Ben Franklin said, from the collision of different perspectives, light can, you know, use this electric concept, light can be obtained. So we emphasize, unlike Fox News and CNN, where you see no debates going on at all, live debates, what they'll show is, here's a perspective, and now I'm going to bring in my experts who are going to attack it, but you don't have any counterpoint. And this is most unfortunate. By the way, I did try to arrange just for this year, I tried to arrange Tucker Carlson to sit down with Chris Cuomo, CNN. So you had Fox News and CNN, the two most popular hosts, and to sit down and have a discussion, a debate, if you will, that would be moderate and civil. It was really interesting that within 1 hour, Fox News was the first one to turn it down and saying, no, these people, we're enemies. You have to remember, the media, if it bleeds, it leads. All of it's negative news. If you watch Tucker Carlson, 95% of everything is just bad, because that's what they want to, that's their shtick. And CNN's doing the same thing, and they don't talk, they both look at the news in a totally different way. We want to change that. So at Freedom Fest, we do dozens, we have over a dozen debates every time. And our mock trial is the most popular session, and we bring in people from both sides, and I have to fight tooth and nail. I mean, we put the pandemic and the lockdown on trial last year in South Dakota. And I can't tell you how long it took me to finally get both sides to show up together and be cross-examined, because we have a judge and we have a defending attorney, a prosecuting attorney, and they call their star witnesses, and you have cross-examining that takes place. It's really fun. And you will see it again when we put drug legalization on trial. And we have representatives from both sides on that. So it's been very much more difficult to do that. So we're trying to fight. We're just trying to get an open dialogue. To me, this is the best solution to all of these problems. If you get both sides of the views, it will become fairly clear, I think, who wins the debate each time. And so that's our solution to the problem that you're sensing. But we're just a small cosm that's doing this. And no one else is doing this. The only other place you can get decent debates is when Congress calls people before them. So you've seen these really kind of fun debates between Dr. Fauci and Senator Rand Paul. And Senator Rand Paul is hoping to come to Freedom Fest this year, and he's going to give us his side. But I said, well, let's get Fauci there, and you two can really go at it back and forth again. I think this would be great. But it's really difficult to put these people together.
Jim?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Great information and for everything you're doing with the Freedom Fest. I might go this year now that I'm going to look at it and see if I can sign up. My question is, I'm not in the economic area, but I've certainly heard enough. Two things. One is about the GSARA and NASARA, the Global or National Economic Recovery or Reformation Act. I think you know what I'm referring to. And I'm curious about if you have any thoughts on that, if you've seen any activity or that might be something that's coming up still. And the other part of my question has to do with Russia being kicked out of the SWIFT system and what's happening with the petrodollar and how does this all affect us?
So I can talk to you about the second part of it. What was your first question? What was that about?
Well, let's say NASARA, the National Economic Recovery Act, Reformation.
Well, explain what it did, Jim.
Well, basically, and I'm looking over to remember it, it ends, it kind of takes over, it ends credits, it puts everything back in the gold standard. It was, I think, an executive order, or it actually did go before Congress. Was that with Clinton? Charlie, maybe you know the details of that better.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with what you're talking about.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's go to part two then.
So I think that this is a very, this could really backfire on the US and particularly the dollar by removing Russia, not allowing them to use the SWIFT system, which is the way to make payments for large corporations and so forth in the banking system. Bank wires and that sort of thing all go through the SWIFT system.
Right.
It's basically hurting the dollar in terms of ability to pay. So now Russia is saying to Japan, well, if you want to pay for the natural gas, you're going to have to pay in rubles. It is I think it's a little bit, I'm really concerned a little bit about that. Although the dollar has still not shown any particular weakness during this entire war type of situation, the dollar is still remaining strong. And of course, the Fed is raising interest rates and that's keeping the dollar strong. But what I am concerned about the dollar as being a world currency and having it replaced by the Chinese yuan or some other currency that will hurt the U.S. in terms of its ability to maintain its economic prowess. So it is something to definitely be concerned about.
Thanks, Mark. My question builds on your lockdown debate from last year and your comment about the lockdown being the real issue, not just a bad flu. What has changed since then is the excess death, which has been exploding since last year. As reported by Edward Dowd, a BlackRock investor, most famously on Naomi Wolf's podcast. And a lot of people are trying to explore what is causing the excess death. And the scary conclusion is it probably was the mandate affecting half the population. And so I ask in Freedom Fest, the real grassroots is growing around health freedom and people's horror at mandates and the real corruption in our government agencies as captured by pharma and big telecom, big biotech. Are there any breakouts at Freedom Fest on informed consent issues, health freedom, anti-mandates, not just lockdown, but some of these kind of sinister countermeasures that have ruined people's livelihoods and lives? And go ahead.
Yeah, John Mackey of the CEO of Whole Foods, who's really into the Whole Foods diet and that sort of thing. He's one of our co-ambassadors. and has spoken on this quite a few times at Freedom Fest. But in addition, we have always had major sections on healthy living. In fact, last year's theme was healthy, wealthy, and wise, which I think was a really good choice for what we were talking about during this pandemic. We have had speakers talking about health freedom, and we had several medical groups who are not part of the system that charge prices and have deductibles and have a normal market type system. We had Sean Flynn, the author, The Cure That Works is about the MediSave program in Singapore. Singapore's has a universal healthcare system that has a high level of deductibles so that they keep the costs down, and you have competition, and you have open markets for various drugs and so forth. They spend 6% of GDP on healthcare versus 18% that we spend, and they're the healthiest people in the world according to recent studies. So this whole area is extremely important. And let me just also say, we made this point last year, extremely important. What did the government do? What did the medical profession do? Well, they focused on the how to fight the symptoms, the end result. Okay, you're diseased and you're getting this COVID. Listen, I had COVID, so I know it can be pretty serious. We were wiped out for a month, and I developed bronchitis, but thank goodness I didn't have to go to the hospital or anything like that. And by the way, we were vaccinated on top of it, so go figure how all this is all working out. The thing is, there was no, I don't know of a single time that any government official, the CDC, or the President of the United States, or the Senate, or any of these government agencies brought up healthy living, diet, exercise. In fact, if anything, they shut down the gyms and the exercising, and they said stay indoors and all this nonsense. How do we deal with the 4 big killers of diabetes and heart disease and cancer and strokes? Okay, those are the 4 big killers. Did anybody discuss how we can reduce that? No, it was all about the vaccines. It was all about social distancing. It was all about mask wearing. And if you were a hermit, yeah, you could avoid the problem. But the comorbidity problem of the obesity crisis in America. I mean, there's so many examples of where we focused on these fundamentals that said, listen, if you live a healthy life, if you eat properly, and you exercise and you keep your weight down. I mean, when have we had anybody do that, whether it's the Trump administration or the Biden administration? So we really focused on that at Freedom Fest. If you're healthy, you're in a much better condition to deal with the crisis. And this is why young people have less of a problem with it. So we've all become somewhat experts in this whole area, but that's my perspective. And that was the perspective at Freedom Fest, and we will continue that this next year.
Thanks, Mark. And in the chat, I put a link to my lobbying client, National Health Federation, the world's oldest health freedom organization. This Friday at noon Eastern, we'll be talking about our campaign to oppose FDA authorization of these COVID shots for children. And that's the source of the excess death that insurers are reporting now over the past year, especially for young people. So health freedom is growing and is going to become huge. And thank you for that answer, Mark. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, kind of a similar question. And I want to keep it somewhat general, but it's with respect to COVID and health. And I know, Mark, that a lot of people want to believe that COVID is kind of over. whereas other people are seeing some really extreme lockdowns in places like Shanghai, or reinstitution of indoor masks in Philadelphia. And there's tons of legislation here in California where I live with some really draconian police state level stuff being put in to, remove licenses of any doctor who disagrees with, Fauci or something like that. So I just wanted to kind of, yeah, well, hopefully, but there's like a dozen or so bills, and a lot of my friends are working with legislators to make sure they don't get passed. So I just wanted to check in with you, Mark, to see what is your feeling about COVID, not so much just the disease, but just all the political and the lockdowns around it. Do you think that we're past it, or do you think that we're kind of distracted with things like Ukraine and inflation now? And is this COVID thing sort of, still quite with us? I'm just curious what your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think this gets down to a fundamental issue regarding freedom and safety, right? As Ben Franklin said, he that gives up essential liberty to purchase a little safety deserves neither. And but that's really what it comes down to. My wife and I wrote a pamphlet years ago called Persuasion versus Force, and you can find it on my website at mskousen.com. And in it, I used a term that or a phrase that Plato originally stated, and that is the sign of a civilized society, or persuasion over force is the sign of a civilized society. The triumph of persuasion over force is the sign of a civilized society. So we have noticed that between mandates and prohibitions, we have been squeezing our freedoms, right? Mandates and prohibitions, squeezing our freedoms. Some countries worse than others. The United States, because we are a federalist economy, and the states were largely in control. I mean, the Fed tried to do what they could, Biden controlling the airlines as if they own the airlines. That was, I guess, the basis of the Commerce Clause in that respect. And everyone else has kind of opened up, but still the powers are still there. This is the danger. The executive orders, the powers of governors to declare a national emergency and to ignore it, ignore the limitations of those things is what's really concerning with me. So mandates, I mean, we have to make mandates a unpopular thing to do. And we need to decentralize decision making. So each university should decide on its own. Each business should decide on its own what the mandates are, whether it's the mask and that sort of thing. Each airline, each university, each organization, each institution makes those decisions. That's the ideal. So if you want to wear a mask personally, that's your decision. But don't tell me when I go to church that everyone has to wear a mask. And this gets back to this libertarian debate. And there are some libertarians who argue for mandates because in a quarantine situation, your freedom ends with, you can swing your fist as long as you don't hit my face or my nose. There's that argument. And I've seen libertarians argue for that. I used to argue for the quarantine argument against my anarchist friends, but having gone through this, I realized that we've given way too much power to executive authority, and they're using it again. They're imposing their mandates. And as I said, they've required wearing a mask now at Columbia University. And so I said to one of the professors there, I said, shouldn't you be the one to make that decision, not the university? In the classroom or the individual, let them make that decision. At Chapman University, they had this universal mask wearing, and I just kind of ignored it. As soon as I got into the classroom, I just took off my mask and I said, I'm not going to wear this. I can't give a lecture being muzzled, and I need to see your faces. But I left it up to the students. It was up to the students. So that's the ideal situation. That's the libertarian solution. Live and let live. That's the model that we need to go by.
And before we end recording here, Mark, you want to leave folks with a final thought on how to survive the worrisome stagflation and threats to our republic, and how to meet you in Vegas pretty soon?
Well, thank you, Charles. And I do hope each one of you, the biggest battle that I've had to face is conflicts. Everybody has a conflict. Everybody has different needs and desires and so forth. But I'm telling you, if we don't join together, if we don't hang together in Vegas, if you will, we're going to hang separately. We're losing our freedom. So I quoted Ben Franklin a number of times here, and we need to come together more. And there are some good signs that are going on. I mean, the Federal Reserve is making an attempt to raise interest rates and fight inflation and so forth. I don't think they're doing a very good job. But at least they're now starting to show some independence, which I think is valuable. We are seeing pushback against the cancel culture. John Cleese is going to be talking about that. There's pushback on all, there's two types of groups. There's the libertarian perspective of live and let live, and you make your own decisions. And there's the authoritarian regimes. See, there's no left or right, but we avoid the left-right dichotomy entirely at Freedom Fest, or at least I get up and encourage people not to do this left-right stuff. We need to think in terms of freedom versus unfreedom, libertarianism versus authoritarianism. And you find authoritarians on both sides of the Republicans and Democrats and that sort of thing. So I think it's better to, if you're going to divide people at all, and I'm not particularly a fan of dividing people, we want to focus on, instead of name calling, instead of labeling, let's look for best solutions. And there are these solutions out there. I teach economics. We have a solution. We have alternatives to the minimum wage. We have market solutions to global warming. We have solutions to all of these problems. And that's what we were focusing on Freedom Fest. So make an effort to join us together, come together. This is so important. And believe me, when you feel that buzz, it's pretty special. That you don't feel you feel isolated a lot of times. Well, when you come together at Freedom Fest and you have 3,000 people there with that same goal in mind, and believe me, we have an impact. Fox News is coming for the very first time to film us. We have lots of media coverage and so on. So we are becoming well known as the alternative solution-oriented conference.
So what about your wealth? If your money could actually talk to you, would you listen to it? Well, with the DNA Network Academy, your money actually can talk to you. And it's going to tell you just what it told this client. This family had over 24 debts, mortgages, car loans, the works. They were on track to take 20 years to pay it all off, and instead did it in 8.5. Plus, they did it without refinancing, making more money, or even changing their lifestyle. So find out for yourself with a free analysis that is completely confidential. No personal information, no social security numbers, no credit checks, none of that nonsense. But what is exciting is that the outcome of that report you receive is a guaranteed outcome for you. To get that report, head on over to bit.ly/debt-to-wealth. You will arrive at this simple form. Fill it in, as simple as lender number 1 and credit card number 2. What really matters is the accuracy of your numbers. You'll be able to see that if instead of 20 years or whatever your number is, that you may actually be out of debt and on your way to wealth in as little as 6.3 years like this client.